Welcome to Honest Money. I think today for me it's a really exciting episode. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. We're talking to Faan Van Der Walt, the co-founder and CEO of WeBuyCars. Faan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Warren. Yeah, it's a great privilege. Thanks for having me.
So the reason I've been so excited is regular listeners will know that I forever talk about don't buy new cars. If you have to finance them for a shorter period of time with as little amount of money as possible. And you run a business that absolutely specializes in selling secondhand cars of all ages and all descriptions to people in as quick and as efficient manner as possible. So firstly, thank you. I'm a repeat customer. So and just for everyone's benefit, I'm not being paid to say this. I am a repeat customer and I'm a big groupie. So firstly, thank you for creating the business and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. This is a interesting business, and we never really planned to create a business like this. It's something that happened over time.
So Faan, I think people maybe living on the far most rural regions of South Africa might not have heard of the business, but otherwise pretty much everyone else has. And I thought it would be interesting just to get a bit more information about the business of WeBuyCars. And I know it's an older business now. It's not a startup anymore, and it's a massive business. But I thought for you to just maybe tell people a bit more about it.
Yes, I'll give you a brief history. WeBuyCars was founded in 2001. So that was when I was still very young. In fact, I started buying and selling vehicles when I was still studying and at school. So we grew up not having much. And one year I saved enough money to buy a little motorbike, which was 400 Rand. And I sold that for 450 a while later, and then went on to buy something for 800 Rand a few months later, which I in turn then sold for 1,500 Rand. And at that moment, when I had that 1,500, I've never touched so much money. And this was in the late 80s, I think 89, when I sold that motorbike. And I just realized that I really enjoy this. It gives me a big kick, and I started doing this as a sideline. But I went to study teaching, and I actually taught for 4 years, 2 years in South Africa, and 2 years abroad in the UK. And when my wife and I returned from the UK after teaching there for 2 years, we saved quite a bit of money. In fact, we saved 300,000 Rand, believe it or not. And that was then in 2001 when we used the bulk of that money to start WeBuyCars. Initially, it was a really small business. We just stumbled on the name, my brother and I, who's my partner in the business. And we thought, what name should we choose? And we decided on a name that describes what we do. Now, the name suggests that we buy vehicles, and that's always been the focus point. Most other dealers out there, they are focused on selling, but we realized that if you don't obtain stock, then you can't sell any cars. So that's always been our edge, and that's our speciality. And today we're quite far advanced in delivering that service in a much different way and a better way. We can determine prices better than anyone. We have a data set that's so large that we can accurately determine a realistic price on vehicles, in seconds. So the execution of that service is obviously very important, and that's where our company culture that we've developed over so many years. It's a natural thing, but it's sort of an extension of your own personality. So getting the right people in the company has been really, really important along the way, and being able to scale the business so that you can deliver this service countrywide was quite a big challenge, and it still is. But today we're a big business. We employ over 1,000 people. We buy and sell in excess of 7,000 vehicles per month. So you can imagine it's become quite an animal.
1,000 people for me sounds like about 500 headaches a month, and just being an employer of people myself, so I can imagine just the scale of doing that with people all across the country must be a heck of a job. And then selling 7,000 cars or buying, I should say, 7,000 cars, and I guess you are the buyer and the seller. You're going to buy a car from someone and then sell it to someone else as well. So that's is that 14,000 transactions in a month, or is it 7,000 in a month?
No, it's 14,000, and so we mainly buy from the public where they are. So the aim is to serve that person who's reached that point in vehicle ownership where it's time for a change, whether it's an upgrade or a downgrade or whatever the reason may be. You might be emigrating or moving into a company vehicle. There are various reasons why people sell vehicles, but we do not discriminate in any way. So even if it's a very old vehicle, even if it's something that's seen better days, we'll serve that client. And on the other end, we love buying virtually brand new vehicles. Some people will win a car in a competition and they sell it with 0 kilometers to us. So what you'll find on our website is thousands of vehicles ranging from virtually brand new to 20-year-old vehicles. So there's something for everyone. So the aim is to serve that client wherever they are, whatever they are driving. Now, on the sales side, we have various channels, which means we sell and move these vehicles on in different ways, which include auctions, just normal cash sales, as well as retail financed transactions.
And I must tell you, for the listener out there, I know that they'll buy old cars because that's what we sell, because we buy old cars ourselves, keep them for a long period of time and then sell them. And we've done that a few times. And so it definitely does work. And interesting journey to watch, because you started it. I mean, it was never your plan, I would guess, to start on day one and say we're going to have this kind of highly scaled, almost internet-driven business. I mean, this was kind of you and your brother doing pretty much everything yourselves, and then from there you create this absolute beast in the market now. And I'm sure the car dealers must hate you. And for me, what's interesting about that is, for a long time, the market here had asymmetric information. In other words, the dealers kind of controlled the pricing. You'd find some old book, that would tell you what the prices of cars were. And I can promise you that price that book tells you every year is not close to what the market necessarily would be. And then all of a sudden, websites came along that helped a little bit. But it wasn't until you came along that you kind of created a market, almost like an exchange. To me, it's the most similar thing to kind of a stock exchange for cars, where in real time we can see and understand prices of cars. And if I look at your prices, it's never very different from what the market should be. I'm not going to talk about your competitors, because I guess it sounds funny, but I think Auto Trader must be a big competitor for you, although they buy and sell nothing, but they have information. And for me, I always check you on that, and it's very close, those prices.
Yeah, I guess the big difference is, between saying what a vehicle is worth and being willing to put your money where your mouth is worlds apart, and that's also what distinguishes us from some of the competitors who try to act as just a platform. You need to be willing to pay that price, and that's at the end of the day what will determine the value of a vehicle. Otherwise, it's just a figure in your head. But if a transaction occurs, it puts a value to that vehicle. But to just elaborate a bit further, about we never envisaged having this big business. I'm not a real firm believer in a business plan, although a lot of people hammer on that all the time before you start a business, but it never works out that way. We never really had a big plan to have a big business. We stayed internally focused all the time, and we just tried to do what we do better every day, improve things. We never even had a budget. You won't believe, but 5 years ago, WeBuyCars never even had a budget. When we brought the first investors on board, they were so surprised. They said, "But how much are you going to spend on marketing this year?" I said, "I don't know. We'll see. As opportunities arise, as a billboard becomes available or a contract to advertise on radio, we decide on those things as we go along." And we had a really good intuition on what worked and what didn't work. But nowadays, we do also realize the importance of having a budget. But at that point in time, I said, well, a budget is like trying to limit your blessings. We always try to exceed budget in a big way.
And I guess, jumping forward, you mentioned you got your first investor, you added a second investor to the mix last year, and so I was watching the interview with the CEO of Transaction Capital, and he, their value, and you're not a listed business, but their value, we buy cars at over nearly 4 billion rand, and that's an incredible achievement. And before your phone starts going crazy, that doesn't mean Faan's worth 4 billion rand, please, everybody. He's got lots of shareholders now, but that's an incredible achievement. In a time where South Africa's gone through so many economic difficulties and so many headwinds, to do that, I think it's a remarkable story, and I hope it kind of keeps getting broadcast around there. So well done to you for doing that. This is the Honest Money Show, so we have to ask you some money questions around this, because it's always about how people can help themselves improve their financial position. So I thought, who better to ask than you for some insider's tips. If I need to buy a car, what are the things that I need to know? What are the things that can help me pay the best price for a car?
Yeah, it's in general, you have to apply your mind and common sense, and the more time, if I could give one piece of advice, is just spend time on this. Don't make hasty decisions. Try and educate yourself. If owning a motor vehicle is something you're going to spend very little time on, then you can expect to lose money on that purchase. It would not be a great investment, but to most people, that's the second largest investment you're going to make in your life. So most things in life, not everything is fun. Not everybody loves browsing and looking at cars. So for other people, it would be a more natural thing to do. But educate yourself, browse websites, read reviews for vehicles, and motor ownership is not all about just that initial purchase price, but it's also about maintaining the vehicle. So when you purchase a vehicle, consider things like, would this vehicle be expensive to insure? Would this vehicle be high on maintenance? What would the fuel costs be? And take all of those factors into consideration. Another consideration would be your resale value. So when you are selling a vehicle, try and present it as neatly and tidy as possible. Have as much information at hand as you could possibly have in order to answer the questions and to provide information that will help the sale of the vehicle. Things like, when was it serviced? What's the history of the vehicle? Was there any repairs done cosmetically or mechanically that's relevant? So all those things will help. So that's on the selling side. On the buying side, there are so many tips that I could give. I'll keep you busy for hours. People ask me this every day: what should I buy? Should I buy new or used? And there's no real answer. It's again educating yourself. For instance, if you went out in 2016 and bought a brand new Toyota Fortuner 2.4 diesel, the entry level one, you could still get back most of your money. Because they were just over 400,000 Rand then, and now you can sell it for exactly the same amount. But if you opted for a different brand, a less popular brand, or one of these French vehicles, you would have lost over half of your money. So make sure about these things, and ask the advice of experts, and buy from a reputable dealer, someone who doesn't mind having the vehicle checked out, someone who you've Googled and read reviews about, and that you trust, that comes recommended. Don't just go and buy a vehicle from whoever's advertising a vehicle, because there are some people with bad reputation out there. Then on the question of buying new and used, obviously there are some good new buys to be had, although we are seeing nowadays that a lot of people are opting for the second-hand option. If we can just go back to January, we've seen the decline in new vehicle sales year on year was sitting close to 18%. The previous year we sold 40,000 new vehicles in South Africa. This year it was 32,000 vehicles being sold. So it's a steep decline. But at the same time, we've seen that the used vehicle registration stayed more or less on track year on year, similar numbers. So that's steady, which shows that people are opting for that second-hand space now. So yeah, buying second-hand can be tricky, but if you do your homework, you can still buy a vehicle with maintenance plan, with warranty, and without having that extra expense. The big mistake buyers make is they want to buy too fancy a vehicle. Now, let's take an example. For the odd 300,000 Rand, you can go and buy yourself a brilliant SUV today. You can even go and buy yourself a Mercedes-Benz ML or a BMW X5. But these vehicles will all be out of maintenance plan, out of warranty, and you run the risk of having big expenses like even just replacing the tires could set you back 40,000 Rand on a vehicle such as that. But for the same money, you can actually go and buy a brand new vehicle that's got 5 years motor plan, warranty, etc., like a Polo, something like that. So I always recommend rather buy a newer but a smaller type of vehicle. It's not as fancy, it's not as flashy, you're not going to impress the ladies with that vehicle, but it's a sensible thing to do. So rather buy something sensible, something more high volume, of which there are many in the market. The advantage of that is obvious. So let's say something goes wrong with your VW Polo. Everyone knows Polos. You can take it to any service station and they've probably seen that problem before. The parts are available, it's cheap. But if you buy a niche market vehicle, when something goes wrong, first of all, troubleshooting that vehicle is a challenge. Finding parts is a challenge, and you'll end up sitting without a vehicle for weeks. Sorry, that's just a few examples. I know we're limited for time.
And no, thank you. I think the more information we get, the better. And Faan, you mentioned motor plan a few times there. One of the themes that we kind of get from people about cars is, they buy a car, let's say either new or 1 year old with a motor plan, and then they sell it, in the 6 months before the motor plan expires because they're afraid that the price will collapse, once it's out of motor plan. Is that something that you see? Is that real, or is that a fiction?
It is real, especially with some of the German makes where maintenance can be really expensive, but I would not be too worried with the mainstream vehicles. And extending motor plans aren't that expensive, especially on your Japanese type of vehicles like your Toyotas and so on. It's actually cheap because they feel that they would rather charge less for extending the warranty, extending the motor plan, but by doing so, they keep that customer, and the customer will come back to them for the servicing and maintenance of the vehicle. So it's not as straightforward as you might think, but it's also sort of priced into the market. As these vehicles reach that point where the motor plans expire, you could potentially see it. But my advice would be, don't let that be what drives you to sell the vehicle. I think a lot of people use that as an excuse to go and buy a brand new car because they just want to.
Yeah.
But financially, just carry on driving the car. Your vehicle. It's not going to all of a sudden become unreliable. These vehicles nowadays are very reliable, and as long as you maintain it and service it, you can easily get 200,000 trouble-free kilometers out of the vehicle. So just rather keep on driving the vehicle. The places where you lose money is when you do transactions. So rather keep your vehicle for longer and really try not to finance your vehicle. I had a youngster in our business the other day. He's 25 years old and he wanted to buy a fancy vehicle, and he got finance from the bank, and I advised him. I said, but listen, that Polo that you're driving currently, there's nothing wrong with that vehicle. It's got aircon, it's got electric windows. Why do you want to go and buy a 300,000 Rand vehicle now? Because once you start this habit, you're 25 years old. By the time you're 50, you'd be still always upgrading, always buying a newer vehicle. And in the end, you pay interest for 25 years on an asset that you can actually, if you apply your mind now and you have the discipline to save a bit of money over the next 3 years, then you go and buy your next vehicle. And by the time you're 50, you could actually have a second house with all that interest that you've paid. So yeah, not everybody is able to go and afford a car cash, but rather than buy something cheaper. And if you could do that, you'll be light years ahead of the rest.
I think you've hit one of the biggest flaws in the whole financial planning market in South Africa for individuals is firstly, I'm sorry to generalize, but I think men spend too much money on cars. I noticed that just between myself and my wife. She's not as married to brands as I am. And then secondly, this thing of having to impress the neighbors and the family with a car. And as you say, and sometimes potential spouses. I think there's nothing more impressive than a big investment account balance rather than a big debt balance, because you bought a fancy, expensive car that you can't really afford. And so I think your point is right. The more we can buy our cars cash, the less we will spend on them. Because the moment we realize we actually have to do that transfer, and there's lots of zeros on that transfer, then it's a different story to saying, well, it's only 8,000 Rand a month debit order off my bank account, as opposed to saying, well, it's 400,000 Rand cash that I'm going to move out of my account. Suddenly we start to spend a lot less on cars. And I think, if we could convince the financial institutions to only finance cars for 2 or 3 years instead of 6 now, or 7 potentially, that would help financially a lot. But obviously the dealers would, especially the new car sales, would hate that. So I think that's power advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't agree more. But it would be hard to break.
Yeah, and Faan, the whole of the lockdown experience, I've heard you talk about it in the past, but has that had a kind of a material change on the industry? Is it now a good time to be a buyer of secondhand cars? Or is it not really such a big impact anymore?
Well, I think that time is over. Just after lockdown last year, it was a great time to buy a vehicle. So we saw sort of like a wave come through where a lot of dealers were sitting with inventory. They were scared. They were out of cash flow because they needed to pay for 3 months salaries, overheads, without any income being generated. We were in a similar situation, and so all the prices were dropped and moved. They just disposed of vehicles into the market. We saw that with rental companies disposing of their fleets because tourism was dead for the foreseeable future, and they were sitting with those assets. Those were offloaded in the market, but they've all filtered into the market now. Now there's a big shortage currently of good quality second-hand stock. Even some of the OEMs don't have stock. So for instance, I heard that if you want to buy a new Toyota Land Cruiser, for instance, right now, they don't have stock. Land Rover Discoveries, they weren't in stock a while back. I'm not sure about right now. So there's a big shortage, and that drives prices up. And there's so we've seen it before, and it's what's interesting is the new car prices went up way above inflation. So it creates this gap between the what used vehicle values used to be and what new car prices are. Now it's pulling up second-hand value. So most car dealers are retailing vehicles way over the retail value currently. Now for the banks, it's difficult because when they want to finance that asset, they look at the book values and they see, all right, this vehicle retails for 300,000 Rand, and they're only willing to finance 300,000 Rand, but the dealers are selling it for 350, 380, and those customers don't necessarily want to put down a large deposit on those vehicles, and therefore it also hampers the business. We've seen it on our side as well. So it definitely had an impact on vehicle prices. As far as the consumer behavior is concerned, we've also seen a huge shift to online. So people are spending, the time they spent on our website is longer. We have more visits, more page views than what we've ever had, but we have less feet on our floor. So people browse and they shop online, and when they visit these facilities, they execute. So that they no longer tire kick and just browse physically at the locations. When they are there, they were there with intent. Now, whether this is some thing that will be a permanent change, I'm not sure. One could argue that it's simply because of COVID-19, people are scared. They'd rather stay at home than go and browse for vehicles. One positive thing, that came out of this is we were developing our online auction platform since 2018. And then last year when COVID came, it wasn't ready yet. But during that time, we finished it and we launched it and we started selling cars online. So as we speak now, we're already selling a third of all our vehicles online, sight unseen.
Unbelievable.
This portal is mainly used by dealers who know and trust our system, because the portal gives a lot of information about the vehicle. There's transparency, it generated trust, and the user experience is such that it's easy to partake and participate in that auction. A typical dealer who buys vehicles from us, he will buy one in Durban today, one in Cape Town, two in Gauteng, and then it will be delivered to them and sight unseen, but they trust it because we also use DEKRA, who do a full test on the vehicle, condition test, etc., roadworthy, so they know all the little issues that might be there with the vehicle. And now that's available to the public to view as well. And it just generates trust. So even if it's a vehicle with many faults, at least you can see it and you can make an informed decision when buying the vehicle.
And I mean, most of us have very little clue about cars. So to get a trusted kind of, place like that makes a lot of sense to me, especially in the online world. I don't think we're going backwards. I think online becomes a massively growing theme everywhere. And South Africa might be a bit slower to catch up, but when we do, we go for it. Faan, we're running out of time, and I'm desperate to ask you one more question, and it's a question I love to ask successful business people, and that's the trick question, which is, if you had to meet the 18-year-old or 21-year-old version of yourself, what would you tell him now with all the experience that you've had? What would be the one kind of golden key piece of advice that you would give him?
I'm actually a very shy person. So when I was at school, and you had to do an oral in front of the class or a little speech or something of that nature, I always declined. And I said, I'll make the points up elsewhere, but I don't like speaking in front of people. And we didn't have money to go and study. My parents couldn't afford for me to go and study. So when I was a matric, I had limited options as to what I was going to do. I was either going to join the police or go and work somewhere. But then our guidance counselor said, no, I must go study teaching. And I thought, no, there's just no way. But she applied on my behalf and I got in there, and that's where I started gaining a bit of confidence. If I could give my 18-year-old some advice, it would be to be less shy and just to be more upfront. There's the saying, "Wie vra nie kry nie," who doesn't ask doesn't get, and to be a little bit more aggressive. I think, to be a bit more risky, because we've always been very conservative in all our business moves. Even to some people, we might seem like an overnight success. We've never, ever taken risk. So I would have probably been a bit more aggressive in building the business. But at the same time, I think those years of being conservative laid a solid foundation. To be less shy.
Back yourself, it sounds like. And Faan, thank you so much. Faan Van Der Walt, co-founder and CEO of WeBuyCars. It's been awesome to have you on the show. Really can't thank you enough. And we hope to chat to you again one day.
Thanks, Warren. Great privilege to be here.